I'm Adam Wilborn from the WhatCulture Wrestling Podcast, joined by Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick of the WhatCulture Wrestling Podcast, available wherever you get your podcast from, and we are here to fix every problem in AEW, basically. Sidge, this is sort of the definitive guide to restoring the feeling in AEW, isn't it?
I hope so. I certainly hope so. No, I decided to write this, so we've decided to discuss this on video because we've got great fans in our WhatCulture Wrestling Podcast community. Thank you very much for your support. We can never stress it enough. And the question we always or very often or mostly get is, it's really cold and the houses are down and the feeling's gone. What on earth can be done? And we've endeavored to go as deep as possible into thinking, right, let's, in WhatCulture list form, identify every major problem. I would say there's about 50. I could write down 50 right now. And I lean AEW heavily. I just think that they are the promotion capable of restoring like pro wrestling back. I know sports entertainment's on fire, and if you like that, listen to Hamflett's work. He's a mark for it. What can be done? We've tried to identify the really major ones. So let's just get into it.
Yeah, first one here. AEW lacking identity.
Indeed. Well, what is AEW's identity? Who is it for? I think what's happened is that somewhere along the way, the E got dropped and it's sort of all wrestling. And maybe you could say arrogantly, Tony Khan has taken it upon himself to just be almost a regulator of wrestling. It's the buffet, it's the one-stop shop. But the problem is that whether through the influence of, Chris Jericho or certain ex-Impact writers or former WWE writers or like road agents who just came up in those monopoly years, like it's just, I don't know what AEW is. The fan base don't know what AEW is. It's Tony Khan as well is running the risk, and this is really bad, of appearing to be, quite frankly, a poser, because he will say in one breath, and yes, he's kind of dropped this from his lexicon. In fact, he's kind of stopped talking altogether, which is probably a good thing. He has branded Collision as for the sickos, and he did this sort of earlier this year, 2024, and basically said, well, it's for the sickos. That's why we can do Danielson versus Nagata on a Collision. And yet, that was on the Saturday. On the Wednesday, there's, Chris Jericho kind of doing his... He's got a very entertainment-shaped brain in terms of pro wrestling. So what is AEW? They need to sort of identify this. So that's the problem. What's your solution to it before I get to mine?
Well, the route one for anything like this is pick a lane, isn't it?
Yes.
It's commitment, sometimes at the expense of a lot of other things. Like, commitment is bold when you're running a wrestling company because there are various masters to serve. As easy as it would be to just, and Tony Khan has done this as a fan before he even gets into wrestling, to just pick a philosophy and follow that. You're in a TV game, you're in a live event game, and there'll be all these different, to Sidge's point, the voices in the room, but some of them will maybe bring information with them or metrics or whatever. And it's putting all of that into this melting pot. And sometimes I think it goes against like what you think would be common sense to neglect some of that. I would argue initially it was almost AEW's strength to appear as if, like, you think we're one lane, but actually we're this. You think we're that, but we're also this, because WWE was one lane, a very, very, very bad one. So like when they like immediately sprung up as like ideal opposition, it was like, well, all we need to do is oppose being just total toilet, and like they can do that. However, now, as the pendulum has swung and and everything changes, culture, society, everything changes alongside with it. People, the way they spend their money, all of this has an impact. Like, if you pick a lane and you tell people absolutely categorically it is this, yes, there is risk. Yes, there will be loss, there will be cut off and all that sort of stuff. But what position exactly are you coming from? It's not like you're coming from your strongest, your strongest period or era or anything like that. You're coming from a position where a bit of change could be as good as the rest. So do that. Watch what might fall away. Try and spot it and identify it and think, well, down the line, is there ways to win those people back? But within that time, within that route, within that lane, sort of rebuild a trust, even if it's with your smallest audience. And I base that strictly on being a new generation lifer.
Yes.
Nobody was around, but the people that remained were given Brett, were given Sean, were given Razor, Jarrett, Kid, Diesel, but like a certain sect of wrestler that just like made you feel rewarded, even if clearly the wider populace had said no thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, again, it's picking a lane. I just get the feeling that Tony Khan is a bit feckless and suggestible, and he finds it very, very difficult to say no. You can tell by AEW's MO that he's a people pleaser. He wants to please all of the people all of the time, and there's a very famous saying that sort of confirms you can't really do that. For me, identity, it's AEW's taken like a real sort of license, or you could say the piss with this. You can still incorporate many different styles. I would argue that is a feature, not a bug. You can embrace lucha, brawling, technical wrestling, and trying to be the very best of all of those things, but have a fixed identity in terms of your narrative. I don't want to see in AEW in excess of, that can still mean something. I don't want to see an excess of, for lack of a better term, sports entertainment finishes where there's relentless interference, belt shots, the like. AEW, and maybe this is another problem in and of itself, is, or at least was, geared towards disillusioned, millennial-aged fans who had grown up with WWE, kids, Hogan, older kids, still like this, it's not a fad to me, Brett. Then when you turn 12, 13, 14, oh God, there's breasts everywhere, that's great. And then when they turn into young adults, because WWE sensibly went for that, well, we're going to go for the younger audience, the teens have stopped caring, John Cena, and then the older fans were like, oh, I don't want to see this. I saw this when I was 8. I don't need to see this. So they migrated over to AEW eventually. That's how it all worked. So that audience, us, probably you don't want necessarily, I don't think, to see a heel cheat in every match on the show. You don't want to see a babyface get protected through some carny finish. Oh, he would have won if the baddies didn't interfere. I think AEW's audience is or was more sophisticated than that. And part of the reason why AEW was able to exist in the first place, they were standing on the shoulders of New Japan Pro Wrestling, which told or conditioned a new audience of, your babyfaces, if they show enough fighting spirit or enough resolve in defeat, I respect them more than a booker cheating them out of it to try and save my feelings. I'm 39 years old. I don't need to do that. So I would go back to the version of, anyway, that imported clean sporting framework, the likes of which both All Japan in their 90s peak and New Japan in their 2010s peak really sort of used to build their talent.
Next up, an obvious problem that everyone really points to. Too many titles.
It's very simple for me. There are 4 men's singles titles. Unify 3 of them. The world needs to be the world. The TNT increasingly is a prize that is awarded to wrestlers who, there's something there. Why don't we try something with them? That's not, the belt doesn't make the man. We know this. Scorpio Sky might have something. Let's give him the belt. Sammy Guevara is a star on the rise. Let's give him the belt. Jack Perry needs a new change in direction. If we give him the belt, it might establish his character. It hasn't worked. It's never worked. It's never going to work. Scrap the TNT. The Continental is, for me, it's like this. I've often described it as this sort of really galling narrative convenience where it's like, Okada, he was synonymous with the IWGP title in New Japan. Now he's got a belt in New Japan, in AEW. He's still the same. It's the same thing. It's not. It is literally a prop with which they are trying to get Okada over underneath this ridiculously overstuffed main event scene, which we'll get to. And it just feels like they are really it's almost insulting to your intelligence of, he's got a title. He's the same. No, he isn't. Get rid of that. It's never really worked. The Continental Classic can live on with a different name as a way to get a title shot at a major show for the world title. I would keep, because I do think a secondary title has worked historically in AEW, particularly through Darby Allin and the TNT. I would keep the International, maybe even change the name because it is a synonym of world. But I like what the International title has evolved into in terms of its identity. Yes, Ricochet versus Takeshita was a crushing disappointment, but if you look at the pay-per-view matches contested for that title, like Roddy Ospreay, Ospreay Pac, Ospreay MJF, like it is, I've described it as a star rating inflation version of the old WWF Intercontinental title in that it's a division for. This is a difficult thing when AEW wants to do the best all the time, but it's the banger division. It's that hybrid style, super indie. Our wrestlers can do everything. They can wrestle like heavyweights, and they can do these incredible cruiserweight leaning things. It's that Takeshita, Omega, Fletcher, Ospreay, Ricochet title. MJF's so good that he can cosplay as that kind of wrestler, even though he really could be a heel, more traditional, you know? I would keep that title because if it's going to be where the best wrestle and actual wrestling fans want to gravitate towards AEW, that's the kind of action they want. So emphasize it as a selling point, which is what a title should be.
Speaks volumes the amount of times people ask us, do you think they should merge the Continental and the International and things like that?
Yeah, it's open and shut for me. For what it's worth, I think this is increasingly becoming a problem in WWE as well. But problems create problems. We're going to cover plenty of ones in this list, but an expanding roster creates theoretically a need for an expanding set of writers and creative types. An expanding roster with an expanded set of creative types theoretically creates a need for an expanded slate of title belts. And, you know, like the kind of one problem begats another problem begats another problem. When, and like, Sidge is like the Bart Simpson in the Sideshow Bar. There's that one little boy who was cynical about this from the beginning, was even wary back in the day of the TNT title launch. And then, like, Cody kind of nails that.
Oh, he was incredible.
And then you look at the roster and you're like, yes, this can be accommodated. And it's an instant star-making device. So you can accept things case by case and look at the roster and look at the shape of things and go, yep. And then it's always a case of just knowing when to say when. And because the roster increased and the creatives increased, and presumably the people you had to please increased.
And Ring of Honor, we got factored into.
And I was just going to say Ring of Honor getting folded in, even if you'd have had just the AEW World title, instantly there's a bunch of Ring of Honor belts that until, if ever that mess gets cleaned up, they're going to overlap as well. There is this feeling that the prizes have lost all their value, so that when you're handing one to somebody, you're not getting the value that you're supposed to get from a title. It is about addition by subtraction here, whether that's through unification, whether that's a putting Beltran and Bane, like one of the worst. I will use WWE comparisons here for good and bad as we go through this, like the new generation. One of the worst periods in WWE was where they were doing one of the best possible things. 2002, the summer, there was an acknowledgement following the invasion that there was way too many belts. So if you remember, all of them were being folded in so that like Rob Van Dam could become the Raw Super Champion. Then Triple H said, actually, I think I'll be taking that. Thanks very much. But that was the idea.
Yeah.
Like week after week after week, Rob Van Dam was picking up titles and it was cleaning things up. And it was like, right, you got two rosters now. So there's just no need for all of this. You've got like, and it would have been effective, and then Triple H killed the business. But like the fundamental point of it was right, and it's bold initially, and it feels on paper almost like you're saying the unsayable, and you can't really do it. But watch how quickly people simply don't care when this belt disappears and this belt disappears. That again, maybe it's you're a product of your upbringing, but like top belt, secondary belt, tag belt does feels right.
Yeah.
For like, you know, I think the women's division is fine. I think there's absolutely a call for two titles. I would also look at your trios tag situation. It's possibly too alienating to bin the trios belts, but I would make an argument that you've only ever been able, you being Tony Khan or whoever, has only been able to truly concentrate on one division at a time.
Yeah.
And I would say you've never had a situation where both divisions have been able to thrive.
No.
So maybe investigate that as well.
I know this is your excellent article that we're adapting here,
Thank you,
Michael Sidgwick, but for the next point, I am going to pass over to your colleague here, because the next thing we're going to talk about with regards to AW problems is WWE's red hot. Is it?
It's boiling, mate. Yeah, it is. We've sort of debated this over the desks. I have a belief, because it's never happened before, that when WWE isn't, piping hot, like there will be an AW still around. That hasn't happened in the previous two booms for WWE. WCW was a mess in the early 90s. North American wrestling just looked dead in its ass. In 2001, 2002, obviously part of WWE's boom was swallowing up WCW and ECW. Ring of Honor and TNA were upstarts in their own way, but neither of them were going to kind of come close to even approaching WWE as a market leader. To go back to 2021 and Chris Jericho making the remarks about Dynamite catching Raw and all of us going, maybe. As wild as that now sounds, that was where we were at. I'm not talking about company size. I'm simply talking about competitive on nights of the week and whatever, in buildings, crowds, that sort of thing. This is going to be uncharted territory when WWE goes cold, and it will. everything's a cycle. Triple H will run out of ideas, whatever. He'll get the sack and the new guy won't work. Who knows?
Yeah.
It is, I genuinely believe there's an opportunity for AEW that we've never seen before, where a well-financed secondary promotion can look immediately at what's turned people off and wonder, can we fill that hole? That remains to be seen, and I understand why people would disagree with that too. But to go back to our very first point, while we are in the situation we're in a roundabout sort of way, there's kind of never a better time to pick that single philosophy. It's never been less of a risk. That the house is going to get that much smaller? Not really. Are the Dynamite's going to get that much quieter? Not really. Is the most of the roster going to get any colder? Probably not.
Like, just signed the TV deal.
Yeah. WWE, arguably at its best before the money started rolling in, was in, for me as a fan, like 1997, and you can actually trace it back to, bizarrely, 1995 and 96, where like it was experimental. It was if nothing else, it was really experimental. And AEW has already shown more of a flair for the experimental, even when business is good. So the opportunity, while WWE is as hot as it is, isn't to try and mimic or copy or anything really to do with them. It's to acknowledge, well, there's no catching them. There's no trying to steal their fans. There's no trying to even make us look like for like. To go back to our first point, whatever lane you choose, whatever sort of identity you wish to adopt, you are kind of free to stick to it because you're just not catching them for now. You're a challenger brand, but it's more in name only at the moment than it is an actual challenge.
Yeah, so this is the Problem Solution Podcast. Problem, WWE is red hot, and historically, when WWE is red hot, the wider wrestling world suffers. What is the solution here? Wait it out.
Yeah.
That's what you might have to do. The other problem underneath this problem is that in 2019, I always think it's overstated, right? I know this is a bit of a tangent, right? I think it's overstated when people say it's true enough that WWE's creative in 2019 in particular was so wretched that AEW had the best competitive advantage imaginable. They could just embarrass them by being good. I think AEW at its peak was as good as WWE was bad, and WWE was really, really bad. So I just want to make that clear. Now, like, Levesque's booking is, for that audience, quite incredible. Is someone who doesn't necessarily like that style of presentation, feels it's a little bit produced as a show. Nonetheless, I'm so taken by something like Cody versus Kevin Owens, which is essentially an classic professional wrestling story that's got its DNA in Bret and Owen. It's just like this sort of like thing happens quite a lot. They are, when they're not doing overtly cinematic stuff like the Bloodline, or overtly melodramatic and very WWE-like stuff, and they're telling really good pro wrestling stories as well. You get still these really awkward, no one talks like that, Miller, verbiage in the promos, but Cody and Kevin Owens and CM Punk and Sami Zayn. WWE have got the best promos in the business now. And that's really, really bad when you're AEW and half of your mission statement was, it's a wrestling promotion run by wrestlers. And the whole thing was, we're not going to do scripted promos. We're going to do great promos. And for many years they did. They could still do that. They really could. I mean, look at they've got Moxley, who's still incredible. They've got Mark Briscoe. Eddie Kingston's going to come back hopefully soon enough. And they've got the talent. It's not ripping off WWE to put a microphone in someone's face. That is the art form of professional wrestling over which no one holds a trademark, This is the trickiest one to write about, and it's the trickiest one to talk about, because all those early competitive advantages that AEW held over WWE has taken them for themselves. Consider this, right? AEW forms, and there is this idea for a multi-year story involving the same cast of characters who will sometimes be faces, they'll sometimes be heels, they'll sometimes be aligned, they'll sometimes fall out, they'll sometimes wrestle together, they'll sometimes wrestle against each other. A misunderstanding or a plot development or someone else having success will drive resentment amongst the other people. And everyone thought, oh, well, this is just going to carry AEW, this kind of new thing of this long, continuous story that can span years and years and years and years and years. And it's happened, but it's the bloodline and not the elite.
Yes.
You know, the ultimate thing that people were drawn to big time with AEW, of the story that never ends and you can just get in on the ground floor. WWE have even taken that and done artistic, you can argue it all day. Financially, business-wise, have done a much, much better job with the bloodline. So what have got nothing left, it seems like AEW.
I think that's like, as you've laid out the reasons why it's such an apt comparison, but just strictly watching both shows as a viewer ardently, the elite are the best, bloodline at the best. Like, this is when wrestling is wrestling, no matter what the initials are, because you can like highlight probably a lot more better matches in that elite saga, because like sometimes the bloodline matches fail to deliver until like the last 5 minutes. A lot of it's pretty dry, and the elite will at least kind of give you the whole match. But really, what am I doing when I'm thinking about those storylines? I'm thinking of the capital M moments in both. I'm thinking of Hangman looking at the broken mirror, or the Young Bucks throwing the drink, or Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. That's what I do when I think about the bloodline.
Yeah.
I think about Roman putting his hand on the Rock's like wrist or whatever. Like, it's wrestling is wrestling. Triple H as a booker got his arse handed to him in the Wednesday Night War, but took notes of what it was that was beating him. Yeah. And like, there's been a lot of copied homework, but that's historically wrestling. Just copy the good homework. Yeah. Like in the case of Cody with the same guy right there.
So if you're AEW, factions, blood, promos, long continued, like they've taken a lot, as they should have. And again, AEW didn't invent half of this.
No.
If any of it, really.
It just needed bringing back to mainstream.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vince McMahon abandoned so much of it.
Yeah. I just, tag team matches have headlined WrestleMania. As you pointed out several times, Hamlet, they got there before AEW did, you know? I know Revolution has happened at last. I really don't know what they would do, other than, again, going back to the first point, operate a pretty staunch clean finish policy. It worked. There could be an idea that in 2021, AEW, and they were criticized for this, and I was thinking, there's not a problem. Look how hot it is. Of a lot of the matches were absolutely out of control. There was blood. They were saying this word every single week. It became a meme. John Moxley's blood loss became a meme. Not for me. I liked it. I loved all that. But there's a sense that's going to feed into a next point that AEW can't really rely on that either because they've done too much of it. Ultimately, for me, I would just make it feel less produced. I would do fewer backstage segments. That's another point that we're going to get to. I would just clean it up a little bit in terms of, there are very few things that WWE do that invite ridicule or scorn, and that you can just do, right, we'll do the opposite of that. I would just go to a wrestling energy and quality and essence with your finishes and be cleaner with it than WWE is. Like less interference spots, you know, fewer interference spots.
Just on that, and you know, I think it's why we're doing it as a list ultimately, as like the long form. We're not saying, at least I don't think we are, that one of these points alone addressed will be like a magic wand effect on business.
No.
But everything we're describing incrementally, like, sort of reintroduces that sense of trust with like the promotion and the consumer and stuff like that. And it's like it's a game of inches, isn't it? You know, like at the moment, like it's gone the other way. AEW sort of suffered death by 1,000 cuts, really. Like, and that was just in 2021, am I right? But no, this is the reverse of that.
Yeah.
This is every single foundational building block that has gradually fallen away, getting put back in, and that's why the turnarounds always take longer than the good times in wrestling, because it just takes that long to do it.
Well, from one of the hardest problems to tackle, Sige, to one of the easiest, the backstage segments are lame.
I hate virtually every backstage segment in AEW, and I think that, you know, it might be considered a minor problem because ultimately what sells tickets and drives business is stars and stories. I hate that word, but it's really important actually. So maybe, you know, like this may be pedantic, but I don't necessarily think it is. I think it's one of the deepest 1,000 cuts of you go and sit down and watch Dynamite and you think, if you're sitting down to watch Dynamite, you either like everything and, you know, I wish I could, good for you. You go to watch Dynamite, I think, because it's a particular type of wrestling that you like, or more pertinently, there's a specific style of pro wrestling that you just don't like, and that is this heightened, wacky world where wrestlers who are feuding with each other magically appear next to one another in backstage segments, or, you know, Mercedes Money can drive over Chris Statlander or get Camille to do that for her and not even a fine. You know what I mean? It's just this wacky, heightened world where you can almost literally get away with murder and it just doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel like you can invest in it. And then the next week they're having a fight and they together burst through a plasterboard wall that has been erected in a contrived way for the sole purpose of making this rubbish, hokey, fake-looking wrestling segment happen. For me, get rid of them. I don't know what the true answer is to the formatting issue because increasingly, like largely through these backstage segments, AEW feels indistinguishable from the worst of TNA, the worst of WWE, the worst of WCW. There's just this lame crap that would only ever happen on a lame fake wrestling show. This is one thing I've stressed over the months and years with AEW that they should do, and many actual TV shows do this, hence why they are, more well-received than pro wrestling shows. Erect a whiteboard backstage, create and adhere to a firm, established set of rules, and only break them when you think that could be more special if we did that. One of the things should be, is this angle that we're booking, and it's Jack Perry getting chained to his stupid bus.
Scapegoat bus, yeah.
Or is it someone getting run over with a car? That isn't Darby Allin because he can get away with that sort of stuff.
Right, yeah.
And just ask yourself the question, pose these rules as questions, right? And if the answer is, well, no, then the answer is no. Is this the sort of thing wrestling has just done historically on TV and fans just go, yeah, I don't believe it's happening, but it's wrestling. We can just do that. No, be better than that. Stop doing it.
Yeah.
You could argue that AEW since day one could have done with like revolutionizing the format of a USA mainstream TV cable wrestling show, and it's just become a cliche of one at times. I don't know what that format looks like, but my God, there's got to be a way to just not be sub TNA.
Pap Quiz, can you remember the one backstage vignette on the very first edition of Dynamite? Even a glimpse.
It was a CU doing the Secret Service Barack Obama impression.
Yeah. And like, if you think about like what that gimmick was and like how it was one of the things that people were like glued to, wasn't it? It's like, well, are they going to adhere to this or what?
Yeah.
Like, it was like a promise card, wasn't it? And it sort of felt like, oh, that's fine actually. This whole show happened and it was absolutely fine with like a minimized presence. Yeah, I haven't got anything to add because this is that creative solution, this sort of sense of
don't do dumb crap.
Rules are good. The one thing I want to say, because it's not really related to how specifically they are terrible creatively, there's a bit of Paul Heyman here in like hide your negatives, extenuate your positives. AEW don't do a good job of these. Like the backstage sounds bad. The company's 5 years old.
It looks so tin pot, rinky dink.
It looks bad. It sounds bad.
Minor leagues.
The where people are standing, the way they produce. I don't know. I've never done that, but like I've watched plenty of wrestling where it has been done, right? And how I expect it to sound. And maybe that's a problem because I've got expectations from a market leader that always has favoured production and stuff. But like, it does, it's like, we go at the back with the remarkable Renee Paquette and then you kind of
And she is great.
And she's amazing. Like, you kind of hear the first 5 words out of her mouth. And then when the sound does come on, you can also hear how echoey the building is. I've never, ever forgotten one of Sidge's great visual representations of the bird's eye view of the queue of wrestlers in foo heads against each other. Just a line of heels and babyface on either side in this hollow, fake feeling backstage area. We've gone from interruptions to car angles to whatever. The point remains the same. They look bad. They sound bad. They're badly acted. They're poorly attended. Like, God, they look like empty, cavernous, sad spaces. And it's like, well, sometimes I've got enough of that out the ring. The last thing I want is to think that's the way with the backstage as well. It's to use Paul Heyman. He couldn't do that with ECW, so he's there in his own frigging basement in front of a curtain and everything feels intense. He makes how small it is feel like that's its strength. It's like they're in some sort of hollow area, ECW's in the background.
They're not allowed on the bigger places.
Cameras on them, and this is like, you've really got to listen in. That's how Mick Foley gets over, that's how Steve Austin gets over. Like, that, if you were going to make a change, I'm not saying this is a solution, and you went to that AEW banner person, and you've got your best 5 promos and they're given that space. And if you want to get that space that they've got, you best prove your worth backstage. You better do John Cena rapping on a bus and be like, put me in, boss, and then you get that go, and then you shine, whatever. Because they're bad at doing this, and yet they continue. They were good in the pandemic because you could kind of do anything in the pandemic, but it's in a live setting. The backstage elements, even when they're good segments, show some of AEW's weaknesses.
Yeah, I would, before we move on, I would erect a permanent Oakland position. The idea of it should be live. Anything backstage, you can sort of descend into that sub. Oh, I've been watching this for 25 years, and the format is so unbelievably played out. An Oakland position with Renee Paquette doing it, live setting. They need more live promos in general. They really, really do.
Fans of the podcasts know that we preview and review AEW every single week, and we do hold it to a very high standard, as we have done for the 5 years it's been on the air. And sometimes
I'm not letting go of that.
No,
I refuse to. Sorry. I refuse to go, all right, okay, well, it's an uneven show. Maybe I should get on the wavelength and enjoy it for what it is. As I've said before, if there was another red-hot state-of-the-art promotion doing amazingly well, I'd probably make my peace with AEW being this uneven, great sometimes, rubbish sometimes, but it is what it is. No, they've got too much talent. They've warehoused too much talent. They've got all of the talent in the world. They've got all of the visibility. It's not good enough.
I'm exactly what Sis described. I'm more patient with AEW because I'm very happy with WWE's offering. But if I wasn't, I would be looking to AEW.
And they've shown that they can do it.
They've shown they can do it, and they feel like they are entitled to do it by gobbling everything up.
I don't like that though, because it does make you feel like, all right, it's time for AEW. There's an obligation to it rather than like locking in and getting excited. It's the arms folded.
No. They've got all the money, all the talent in the world. There's no excuse. Sorry, go on.
But yeah, one of the problems that AEW has had and still has is people, I'd like to think, unlike ourselves, who are what we like to call bad faith actors, who are always being mean and nasty about the product regardless of what it actually is like.
Yeah, I phrased it in a pretty facetious way, but it's very hard to, all but impossible really, to sort of quantify how much of an effect this sort of new sub-industry of bad faith podcasters burying AEW, because there are some people out there who, for whatever reason, AEW is fundamentally just a horrible thing for them existing, or they hate it, or it happens. It is what it is. Now, there's certain bad faith podcasters who have very intelligently decided, I'll just grift these people. I'll grift these people. I might not even believe it. I might not have the credibility, having ran 2 separate promotions into the ground, to say this stuff, but it's what people want to hear. It doesn't matter if I have credibility or not. As long as I've got great delivery, which he does, doesn't really matter at all. Now, if I go on YouTube, right, and I watch, wrestling content quite a lot, obviously, and you go on, the algorithm will say, here's for you suggested. I'll get some of that anti-AEW rhetoric half the time I'm writing it. I do get it. Like, I'm trying to be sort of reasonable, as I hope this is, as this podcast is. You see a lot of it. If you're the mythical casual fan, and there are some of them out there, I don't like the term, but there are some of them out there, and you've heard of this somewhat new wrestling that there is. It's only 5 years old. There's somewhat new wrestling as a new WWE. That's like, the Hoover thing. As a new WWE, is there? All right, okay. Because I have had people talk to me about this sort of thing before.
I've got a lived-in example in a minute that I'll say when you finish here.
Okay. And then you go on YouTube and it's like, AEW's in the mud. AEW doesn't tell stories. The wrestling's dangerous. Blah, 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 blah. It will probably have a conditioning effect on some people if I'm not checking this out then. I'm not checking this out. So I don't know the extent of it, or if you can ever calculate or measure the extent of it. I think it's a problem. I think AEW sees it as too big a problem than it actually is, personally. And I think their reaction to this bad faith grift racket is wildly disproportionate, and they need to grow up. And again, this one's really hard to sort of quantify generally, but all this criticism happens, and they were doing it in 2021 when they were red hot. So you can kind of do it now, which is a bad look for AEW. It means they've sunk to some depths if some of this criticism's actually warranted, when it was always so overblown. It isn't anymore. That said there were more than the problems we're going to discuss here. Tony Khan, I'm paraphrasing, and I can't remember the exact point at which he said it, but he said to be AEW is to be constantly under attack. And what you might have noticed, some parallels happening, is that this has been going on since day one, but who cares? We can take the piss out of them, if anything. We are in our invincible era, 2019, somehow through 2020, 2021. Then, the decline happens, brawl out happens, and then the voices get louder and there's an audience for it. And now there's a credibility behind this, which means it expands and now kind of defines the conversation, really. Tony Khan comes out with that quote, to be AEW is to be constantly under attack. And then what starts to happen is that because he genuinely feels like he's under attack, he develops this sort of like siege mentality of, oh, we're still great, better than ever, the feeling's back. Dax Harwood, Adam Copeland, get out of that ring and cut rah-rah speeches for me. Darby Allin, your agency is going to get eroded slightly as a prospective world champion because your identity is now you're a mascot for AEW. They're so defensive and paranoid about this criticism that they get that AEW's genuinely developed this sort of cultish quality where if you don't live and die with it and it's not your identity, I personally, as someone who actually loved this or loves this thing sometimes and wants it to succeed badly because it aligns with my tastes, I'm put off by how desperate it is and they're telling me it's great when I'd just rather you showed it. Ignore them, rewire your brain, stop operating like a cult that has been ostracized by wrestling in the fraternity or whatever of pro wrestling, and just reorient AEW, which I never want to hear mentioned really again unless it's in front of the name of a title belt, as a backdrop to title programs and grudge rivalries, It's sucking itself off.
As if any of these bad faith actors, as you say, are going to turn around and put their hands on them and say, you know what, actually, that was... They're set in their ways now, aren't they?
You can monetize the bad faith criticism on podcasts and YouTube. The only thing you're going to get from toxic positivity is a blue tick is some extra followers on Twitter. Where would you go if you were just completely passionless and thought, I want to make a buck off this? Stop listening to these people. I see Tony Khan and Dax Harwood go back and forth with people on Twitter. It's been happening for years. Log off and listen to your actual paying customers.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to hear pro AEW rhetoric over and over and over again.
Sick of it.
This has been emphasized in storylines since the JAS and the BCC, all the way down to the Elite versus Team AEW, to now the Frontline versus the Death Riders and AEW this, AEW that. Since AEW became prominent as this thing that we should care about, as opposed to the backdrop of the things that we care about, the ratings pattern has gone whoosh. And I'm not saying that's entirely to blame. The exits of Cody Rhodes and CM Punk are obviously much bigger business drivers, but this desperate, paranoid, cultish stuff is not remotely helping.
It's an extension of a massive problem WWE used to have. A different one, but it could end up going in the same direction. When the Mr. McMahon character was born, kind of after the Montreal Screwjob, it was easy to make Mr. McMahon the heel. And then when that got warped and they kind of ran that into the ground as a babyface versus authority figure, you ended up inadvertently making WWE the heel. So it was like any authority figure was a villain. Any sort of authority figure hated the top babyface, and that just became the template. And with that, it didn't matter if it was Vince or the weaker sort of Vince knockoffs from Eric Bischoff, right the way down to a Mike Adamle or a Brad Maddox. Do you know what I mean? There was just some heel in a suit that didn't like your favorite wrestler.
For no reason.
Your favorite wrestler. And this is it. It's because your favorite wrestler's the only one. I hate that John Cena. Why? Because he's the only one that drives business around here.
Yeah.
Nobody's even stopped to think why. It was just that was how it was done. It was awful. It was a bad template. And fundamentally what it did is that it created an entire generation of those disillusioned millennial fans that felt, well, if we're paying our money and we're kind of being invited to boo the initials, let's do it to such an extent that we hijack the shows. We're never going to give this star the time of day. We'll try and boo as loud as the kids are cheering. Right, or the kids and the women and the fans that WWE actually want to court and are not bothered about your boos, they will continue to court them. We'll boo the next one when we see it happening again with Roman Reigns. We'll power a wrestler who did deserve it in Bryan Danielson up to the top of the card, but we'll do it in as much protest of the whole thing as it is love and support for him. And what a warped and desperate situation that seemingly we were going to be trapped in forever and ever and ever and ever. AEW is not that, but it's only out of the defensiveness. Tony Khan has invoked AEW as a living, breathing character for the last couple of years now, but it's only down to probably watching that happen and his stubbornness and probably a little bit of his ECW fandom that has made him deify those letters at all costs. It has never been the heel like in the stories, but it increasingly feels like the heel because it is so domineering as a principal thing that all the characters work around now.
Yeah, there's before we move on to the next one, I want to make one more point on this. I love all three wrestlers I'm about to reference, right? There is a difference between what Cody Rhodes does, and AEW needs that top baby face. I didn't write it on the list. That's a problem. You need a top baby face who can talk people into the buildings. There's a difference between what Cody Rhodes does and what Darby Allin and Orange Cassidy have kind of been scripted to do so far. Cody Rhodes will mention, I love being an ambassador for the company and a representative of the company, and that's sort of loosely a part of this Kevin Owens thing.
It's the shoot bit of being a world champion.
Yes.
That's what it is. That belt is more than just this fake thing that you fight for. It's a presidential position of being at the top of a wrestling company.
There's a key difference between what he's doing with that title, because in the meantime, he's having, again, another problem with AEW with its sort of, it's sucking itself off in its own initials and its cultish quality, is that personal issues draw money. Cody Rhodes and Kevin Owens, that just doesn't feel like it's happening in AEW right now, you know? Darby Allin and Orange Cassidy talk about AEW more than they talk about Darby Allin and Orange Cassidy. You know, it's personal issues draw money, and Tony Khan has really lost the thread on that because of stuff like that.
Next up, a solution that they did for 1 week, and then they took away again because wins and losses don't matter anymore, do they, Sidge?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, again, like good promotions, hot promotions make this simple. I should mention as well that one of the impetus really for this was problem, really cold atmospheres. Solution, we're going to move to smaller buildings. Oh, what else can they do? So for this one, remind me again what it was.
Wins and losses don't matter anymore.
Right, look at the examples I drew on were Hologram wins matches into the double figures almost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. 12, I think.
Yeah, something like that on Collision. Doesn't get a shot at one of the 4 singles men's titles, which, I mean, he should. Meanwhile, on Title Tuesday, Emi Sakura gets a shot at the title of Mercedes Moné to both the New Japan Strong and the TBS. Emi Sakura has not won a single singles match in AEW since Dark and Dark Elevation were fixtures.
Yeah.
Make that make sense. The solution, the good solution, would be bring back the rankings, okay?
Yes.
Isn't going to happen. It's too politically delicate at the top of that men's singles division. It's too unwieldy to do, because what you've done is you've had a device, the ranking system, which is now unworkable because of your greedy recruitment spree, which we'll get to imminently. I like the rankings. They kept everything honest. I loved how when they used to do the graphic drop on their website and on socials, you would see Darby Allin's face and, I don't know, 5th or 4th. John Moxley's at the top, and you'd think you got a visual representation of the hierarchy, which actually existed at the time, and you thought, Jesus, Darby Allin isn't that far away. If he just wins some matches, and that's like, he could be a headliner. Such a magic thing. You can't go back to that.
No.
Now that you've just been so greedy with your signings. What you can do, right, and is what other hot, logical, well-booked promotions have historically without the actual explicit ranking system, is had a thought of themselves, and with correct, proper planning thought, love this wrestler, nowhere near ready yet for a title, I won't have them win every single week in random matches. That would lead people to think, oh, well, they're due for the title picture. Or, this wrestler, do they deserve this shot? Emi Sakura? I think Emi Sakura's really good. No, she doesn't. I mean, it's basic common sense stuff. It's either basic common sense stuff or an incredibly elaborate ranking system.
I think I want to go back to the idea that why all of these things kind of all have to happen all at the same time and all need to be thought of kind of, you have to put almost as much effort into each one of these things individually, is because one of the biggest advantages a company has when it's winning or when it's hot or when it's satisfying its consumer base is that you can make broad sweeping generalizations about the positives, and it's actually like, it does hold up to scrutiny.
It feels true.
It feels true. So like, we are not sat here and saying that like WWE right now in 2024 won't have pushed somebody that has felt out of nowhere or doesn't really feel like they've earned their spot. There's one that springs to mind. There will be loads more. It's wrestling and it's churning. There's loads of it. But something like the Andrade Carmella Hayes thing, where they've both been in the middle of a best of 7 in which they've both had title shots, lost, continued having the best of 7, and both ended up getting another title shot against LA Knight. That's one recent example, and elements of that feud were critically acclaimed as well. But
Jinder Mahal, Seth Rollins.
Jinder Mahal, Seth Rollins, because of a bit that happened on So Ultimately, you know. There are always examples of this, but because there is a lot of earned faith in the process, they are like, they're not even aggregating rule-proving exceptions. They're just like, oh, okay, well, like, they get a go. For the most part, everything is working. So, yeah, you can afford a bit of space here. That's what we're looking for in AEW. That's why I think a lot of people are scared of the rankings, is because it's like, well, you can't have that because every now and then you do have to give a push to somebody. Yeah, you can have that with a rankings framework. You can create a storyline reason for this match to take place out with the rankings or something like that. I am not asking for absolute perfect, nailed on, the information and the data is held. Like, Will Washington strikes me as one of the busiest men there anyway. I don't want to make his job any harder by being like, I get the pen and paper out here, mate, and every single thing has to be accounted for. Because even at this peak that we speak of, I haven't got an example to mind, but I know for a fact things will have been the case where it's like, oh, they're getting a title shot this week. Yeah, well, you know, they're credible and they're good and they're part of this entertaining framework, so I'm into it. Why not? Because everything else is, you know.
Good booking on the large part will just enable headcanon.
Totally, absolutely, and it should, because this is the point. You feel satisfied as a customer. We are all customers to these products at the end of the day, and when you feel satisfied, I like my Coca-Cola, and this cinnamon one didn't really do it for me, but it's not going to stop me going and buying like a regular Coca-Cola tomorrow. You know, it's like you can absolutely allow small infractions, if you even want to call them that, when everything else is cooking, when everything else feels good, and you have a trust and a sense that the people you are backing can be followed through on, because that's ultimately what it's about. What this neglect of wins and losses and progression has done is what it always does in wrestling. It's drastically reduced your emotional investment in 90% of the roster. Like, you want at this point, your investment and your enthusiasm is entirely rooted in individual in-ring performances. We're kind of probably all thinking Darby Allin, right? And there are others, but like, and chillingly, if you're an AEW fan, that reminds me of the era, and it was a long old era, where I watched WWE hoping that my favourite wrestlers would have a good day at work. Not that they were on this track to win the belt at WrestleMania. You know, like, that was like, well, they survived another week on Raw.
They ruined Bayley and Sasha.
Where the characters haven't been destroyed by the booking. Whew, on to next week we go. It's a different kind of problem in AEW because the booking just isn't that destructive. It's not that destructive by any means. But if you've got an absolute favourite, and one of the things you love about them is like these killer matches and the progression they have, you're just not seeing it. You're not seeing that awesome match result in like another awesome match and a bit more growth and another series of wins. Takeshita is a perfect example. That man went the longest time with the love and adoration of AEW's core fan base and seemingly got nothing in return. And then he gets a belt, and then they start pinning him in order to set up contenders. Like, that moment of him getting crowned was a lot of people going, thank God our cries have been heard. And then AEW saying, right, well, look forward to him getting his shoulders pinned. Like, you just cannot do it. You cannot do it.
Everything's been done, Sige.
Yes. This is like, I've described 2023 and 2024 as the post-everything era. Like, Tony Khan, he's a weird guy to sort of analyse in terms of his booking patterns, because sometimes he'll take ages and too long with something. Other times it's just so sudden, to the back. You can't even luxuriate in a title celebration. The problem is that for 20-ish long years, WWE fans were starved, or like wrestling fans who just wanted to see a big spectacle. And that's what they were raised on, and that's when it, quite frankly, looks the best. From that big stage, where you want the loudest reactions, was starved of blood for ages, unscripted promos, like different styles, like so many things. Tony Khan has done a speed run of everything.
Yes.
Like he's embraced every style. He has normalized a free agent. I always use the example of Jeff Cobb appearing in February 2020 out of nowhere, where you thought, oh, they've got access to Jeff Cobb. I think Jeff Cobb's phenomenal on his best day, but he's not a huge star. And I would say that bigger stars have arrived en masse since Jeff Cobb, who didn't summon that, God, everything's possible here feeling, because, oh, everything's possible here. Like the intonation of that phrase and that thought has now changed for something worse. They've signed every free agent. They've collaborated with every promotion. Oh, you wanted AEW New Japan Supercard? Check. Oh, you wanted like this ex-WWE star to get a new lease of life in AEW? Check. Oh, you wanted like blood? Check. Unscripted check. They've done everything, and it now they have left themselves very few USPs.
Yeah.
Like, we're spoiled. Here's the thing about AEW as well. I try and mention this every other podcast because it really does bear repeating. We're spoiled. Wrestling fans are fickle. Part of the problem is that wrestling just doesn't bloody take a week off, so it's kind of easier to get bored with it than it is other mediums. You know, if they're not releasing a new AAA game every single week, but you are seeing a match every single week in wrestling that could go 4.5 stars. You know, it's a bit much. They've done absolutely everything, so like nothing really feels special. I was really happy to see Bobby Lashley in AEW. I didn't feel like the landscape of the industry had changed because there'd been a jump when Moxley at Double or Nothing 2019. It was completely different to that. You can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. There's no easy, elegant solution to that. But drawing on an example of how you can make things feel a little bit cleaner, more understated, so that if you do a big development, it can mean something again, is where they stand on pro wrestling violence, in that Chris Jericho wins that ROH World title, okay, in a ladder war against Mark Briscoe. 2 weeks later, he's involved in a fight without honor, in a match also involving a ladder, also involving Mark Briscoe. Within a 14-day span on television, Chris Jericho's worked 2 ladder matches. What are we doing here? I don't know the answer, but let's go back to the whiteboard and like book 1 ladder match every year, but not at a fixed point of the year, because then you get to the War Games, Hell in a Cell problem. WWE, and loath though I am to, put them over, is something that AEW should aspire to, but the script has been completely flipped and lessons need to be learned from WWE, whereas, as we've covered, WWE once needed to learn lessons from AEW. If WWE, with the right story, with the right discipline, by not doing it too much, are able, and think about saying this, but 4 or 5 years ago, 3 years ago, have restored the aura of the Hell in a Cell gimmick. That was thought dead in the water forever. Actually, it was just dormant, because with the right story and the right circumstances, and by just turning on that blood faucet, after turning it off for a little while, they rehabbed the aura of that gimmick. It was dead. With the right story and the right characters and the right discipline, using that example, because it's literally just happened, what's stopping AEW from doing that with a ladder match? Really, what's stopping them? Other than stop doing it every single freaking week.
Yeah. I think maybe a sort of more, to praise AEW for something here, a more sort of positive example of how they've done that, because the ladder match is just this thing that people have come to despise because of overuse across everywhere, really, would be the Gauntlet versus the Rumble. They've acknowledged that Triple H cannot yet, or he's not proven yet that he can book a Rumble to save his life. And after a few tweaks later, an AEW have landed on the Casino Gauntlet, which...
We were there.
That was incredible.
And they've knocked out 3. The tag one was a bit rubbish, but they've knocked out 3 singles one.
But that's the thing. The tag one was rubbish, and they went back to it so quickly. This is a Tony Khan problem.
Yeah. Which ultimately you're never going to change the whims of a leader, and Tony Khan has got his own whims and quirks and stuff. But that's an example when it's hot of something that like is theirs now and makes people feel good. And if they advertise one for Dynamite next week, you'd be buzzing. You couldn't wait. It'd be the thing you'd be most excited about. Sometimes it's a bit of dumb luck. Sometimes it is a bit of ingenuity and creativity. But yeah, looking up and down again at the landscape and trying to spot where those wins are to be claimed, it wouldn't be the worst thing from a strategic point of view.
All these points, like Hamlet has alluded to, they sort of feed into each other, but particularly this next one we're going to get onto now, does this sort of relate to it in that Tony Khan's burnt out and therefore there's no long-term planning, hence why they go fight without honour?
It's just an easy thing to dress something up, really. The ladder match was my example because WWE did it with Hell in a Cell, but it's an across-the-board thing. So problem, Tony Khan is burnt out. There's no long-term planning. He's in the churn, which makes long-term planning difficult. And he's kind of run out of ideas. What's the solution to that?
Happens to the best bookers.
Right. You should do this, I would say now, right? Right now, at time of recording. It is Wednesday. You know what that means. It's Wednesday, the 27th of November. I would have Tony Khan do this right now because he's got the Continental Classic booked.
That's a good point, yeah.
That'll take, is the bulk of Dynamite and Collision is pretty much booked up until, the end of December.
Yeah.
Take December off. Every single year you should do this. I would argue every booker, if they're, not an indie living from, show to show, every booker should do this. And in fact, they used to, in Memphis, they used to change that book all the time. They would get ahead of it.
6-month cycles.
They would get ahead of it, knowing this is what happens. So let's get ahead of that problem and keep this, one of the most enduring territories hot. Every single month every single year for at least a month, Tony Khan should take a month off. Hand over the week to week to, I don't know, because there's no unions, you don't know who gets credited and who's doing the actual work. You hear whispers that RJ City's done a great job with the Tony Storm, Mariah May program. Certainly Will Washington seemed to suggest on Twitter that he had a hand in the Best of the Hangman Page Swerve Strickland stuff. Maybe give it to one or both of them. It's like sort of showrunners for maybe 2 months, right? During this 2 months, this is never going to happen. During this 2-month period, Tony Khan should take a goddamn break. Relax. Have a margarita. I'll give you a recipe. It's fantastic.
No football, no wrestling.
Add some watermelon to this because it's it gives it a more refreshing quality. There's more of it to drink, and it at once tastes like watermelon and perfectly carries the flavor of the margarita without dulling it. Because when you want a margarita, you want that spirit-forward, sharp. I feel a little bit of a buzz already. Do that and do nothing for a couple of days. Learn how to relax, unwind, decompress, empty your head. Then sit down, plan. And what happens is you'll be able to plan because you don't have to worry about what 7 matches do I need to do on Collision this week. And then if someone wins that, and then by the time you've gone through that permutations, it's 2 days later, and you're on the show of day of Dynamite, and you're like, has anyone got plasterboard? Right? Take those 2 months, because what you're doing in that 2-month period is you are, in a sense, what you can also do, is you can sit down and you basically say, unless it's an emergency, just don't bother us. You're a billionaire. People will not do this if they don't have to. Not only do you not have to go, right, collision, rampage, and then it's Wednesday again, where's the plasterboard? If you're not in it, present physically in those venues, you don't have to knock at the door. Hey, it's Chris Jericho. I'm kind of one of the last guys to think of this idea. And then you go, all right, okay, well, you're one of my top stars. It's a politically delicate situation. Yeah, you can do that this week. Even though it flies in the face of what I'm trying to do on Collision and I'm appearing like a poser, I'll do this. And it's just this mess. You'll have no one in your ear to just convince you to do things that deep down you don't want to do. Okay? And what you're effectively doing is you are replicating the conditions with which you were able to launch AEW as this quite amazing thing for the first 2 years. Because for those 2 months, you can plan loads. 2 months is a long time and a short one. like what happened on Dynamite 2 months ago, it wouldn't feel that long away. But if you're just away from things, 2 months is a long time, you know. Replicate the conditions with which you launched AEW in the first instance. Tell people you're doing this. It's like they've promoted that there. Well, yay, we're going to downsize venues. That's what we're at with AEW right now. Like any kind of admission that it's not the best, it's kind of a babyface move. So if you say I'm taking 2 months off, it's in Will Washington's capable hands, he's done this, it's going to be great for 2 months, and then we're going to come back with like loads of long storylines. That's what you said at the start. People believed you, and you actually went through with it all, and it was great. The rise of Hangman Page, etc. Every booker should do this once a year.
It's the single most devastating thing for me about watching AEW is watching it become a week-to-week promotion, and then it was doubled down when the story came out. Like, devastating to my viewing experience. That has failed over and over and over again, and always will. To maintain your interest and maintain your investment and all that sort of stuff. Yes, elements of pro wrestling.
Where's Okada Takeshita?
Yeah, like elements of pro wrestling are week to week, but like, and things get dropped from time to time.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they don't, but like, it's always been just like a box on your house, like watching a week to week show and it being so clearly week to week. Because that's one example, and it's like often the damage doesn't reveal itself until like the true nature of it shows itself. And I think with like Okada Takeshita, what we're currently living through is the Takeshita's like non-involvement in the Continental Classic. The Continental Classic could be amazing, and one of the first things people thought was, where's Takeshita? Because I was allowed to think
They had
about
the
this.
four-way match
like,
with him, Okada. Who else was in that? Mark Briscoe.
Yeah, who else? And they did the face-off.
It appeared to be because Takeshita and Okada had also interacted backstage, and the idea was, oh God, that match is happening, and then they're teasing it via this four-way, and then it's gone.
Okada's got this belt, and you know that, like,
And then it's gone.
and that's, you know, and
Was it Orange Cassidy?
Yep, Takeshita, Briscoe, Orange Cassidy, Kazuchika Okada, all
And
that
it was
2024.
Yeah, it was mid.
Yeah, aye. And I just think, like the way Sidgwick's laid it out is like probably the ideal scenario for a billionaire with the time and money and resources. I've always been just a big. I remember the first time you hear it, whether it was Chris Kresge or whoever, but the idea of even going back to like, you know, not great people, but like the Vince Bruce and Pat Round the Pool thing. It's like, right, WrestleMania's all the way over there, a year's time, whatever. Like, what is it? What's the card? Like when you were sort of laying out that example there, I was thinking to myself, right, and where would I start if that's me? I would start with Dallas All In. And I'll be like, what's that card? What is it?
Yeah.
In your perfect world, no injuries, no whatever. Everyone goes exactly where you want. How does that look like? Right, there's your card. Can you get there? Let's find out. Let's work backwards. And like monthly pay-per-views are like good and bad. And one of the good ways is, well, you've got like a monthly checkpoint. It's not just the checkpoint at Revolution and one at Double or Nothing.
Yes,
it's like one here. That actually can be helpful. Makes your life a bit easier because you can see it a bit clearer. I would argue the stadium nature of WWE's Big Four setup now is starting to reveal itself in the booking. We always used to say you should start getting an idea about WrestleMania on Survivor Series. That's been made true by these stadium settings because like Triple H has kind of killed the slump periods. He'll do Mania to SummerSlam, he'll do SummerSlam to Survivor Series back to Mania, and off we go again. Like, I don't know if that's exactly how he does it, but as a fan, that's kind of what I feel like I'm watching. Like a lot of big stuff goes down in these stadiums. And with AEW still having Dallas and still having these tent poles that Tony Khan does like. He's a wrestling fan like the rest of us, and he likes dates and anniversaries and signatures and things like that. He's got the template in place. He does have the template in place. It doesn't have to be Dallas. I just think you kind of want to, that's all in's your jewel in your crown at this point. Like, if you're going to make one show, it might as well be the one in front of the most people. And whatever because we do it as fans. We talk about who's the top star, who's the guy that feels untouchable even in a cold product. It's Will Ospreay. And what are we doing? We're thinking about when Will Ospreay wins the belt and when he loses the belt. So we're doing it as fans. So if he's then inviting people to do it based on the clues that he's given in his booking, which is entirely how the Hangman Page story worked, because that's how the twists worked. Because you had it in your head when he was going to win the belt, and then they actually take a left turn. You're like, whoa, what?
Yeah.
And then
Lost
it's like,
to Brian Cage.
Well, how's that going to work? And then you've got like the tag team run with Kenny Omega, and when you think they're going to lose, and then when Kenny's heel turn starts to reveal itself, you're like, well, but this changes everything because you've already started building these pictures in your head, and then you've been invited to tweak that and twist that a little bit. That's what setting that end point and working backwards does, and nothing we're saying here is reinventing the wheel. Nothing. Like, that's how it's done, and done well.
Our next problem can be summed up by this button, Sidge.
You're joking. Not another one?
Tony Khan signed too many wrestlers.
Go back in time and not do it.
I was going to say, what's the solution here?
The solution to Tony Khan signing too many wrestlers, which is realistically at the root of a lot of this, it means there's no hierarchy. It means that there are too many storylines to plan for these apparently featured players, and stars retain their star value by winning a lot of matches. That then feeds into how predictable AEW can feel and why the pay-per-views feel so long, because Bobby Lashley, Swerve Strickland, MJF, Will Ospreay, and then Fletcher, if he cracks that bracket, and John Moxley and Hangman Page and Adam Cole and Kenny Omega when he comes back. Like, a fully fit AEW roster doesn't bear thinking about. How many singles matches have to happen? The pay-per-views will go 7 hours. And then because there's so many men's singles matches, because you signed too many men's singles stars, and, you don't have 8 strikers in a Premier League squad or 8 quarterbacks, because you depreciate that value if you're not playing them at the right positions at the right times. Because there's so many men's singles stars. Jay White could be one of them theoretically. Orange Cassidy, Darby Allin's going to be one if he isn't already. There's tons. There's not many space. We'll do one tag team match. That means you can't have a healthy division, and you can't take seriously the stars of those division because of that division, because they don't appear on the pay-per-views, and that's sort of like, they'll do stuff on Rampage. Well, they're not a star then, if they're not on your A shows. Oh, we can only have 1 or 2 women's matches on the pay-per-view. Well, sucks if you, I don't know, anyone accept the champions at that point. If you're Chris Statlander in December, you've had your match at Full Gear, so I don't know what you're going to do, that sort of thing. You signed too many men's top singles wrestlers. Adam Copeland's going to have something to do when he comes back.
Yep.
Go back in time is one solution. You're not allowed to do that. Solution number 2, start being incredibly ruthless about who's performing and who isn't. There's a wrestler whose name I'm not going to say out loud that I would instantly remove from every future pay-per-view until that wrestler, who's a men's top singles wrestler, who could be considered or used to be considered someone who could headline pay-per-views and has in fact headlined pay-per-views. He's not doing the business. There's too much competition. Get rid. Tony Khan's not going to do that. He's constitutionally unable to do that. Really, for me, and I would never suggest it right now because you can barely fill the arenas for Collision. WWE had a similar problem in 2002 because the influx of WCW talent is a brand split. I think a brand split is really the only elegant solution, because I would never suggest firing people. And now if you fire people, WWE would gobble them up. I would never suggest doing that unless, like, even in a fantasy booking scenario, right, which this is, I still feel guilty about saying it. I'm not freaking cutting off their checks, but yeah, it's still a bad thing to even think out loud. Just don't use them. Don't use them. Don't use some of stars on $1 million contracts. That's stupid business. You can't invent time travel. A brand split. This is a problem that's never going to go away until these contracts run out. It's such a problem and people don't talk about it enough. This hierarchy. I've loved watching Kyle Fletcher over the past 3 months. Revelation is the only word, because if you go back and watch the Dynamite after Dynasty, right? Swerve Strickland has a match with Kyle Fletcher, and it's PWG landfill, the worst match they could have together. No botches, just it was there. In the interim period, Swerve Strickland becomes an incredible champion, and Kyle Fletcher becomes the breakout star of the year, right? As much as I love watching Kyle Fletcher and where he's been to where he is, do you really believe he's going to headline Double or Nothing 2025? I don't. And that's crucial to this. I believe in the process, and I'm going to see my guys succeed. I just cannot possibly fathom that he's going to headline a show.
Yeah, it's not something I'd pitch forever, but until that sheer scale and size of the roster has been dealt with a little bit, it's something I've advocated for a while, where this isn't a fix for Collision, but again, we're dealing with like rock bottoms that we're already at. So like, how much worse can you get? I've advocated for a while now that you create an kind of unofficial and unlabeled Championship Premier League. I don't know what the American equivalent would be. Like something akin to Dynamite is absolutely the A show, and if you are performing in it, and you can judge performance based on quarter-hour spikes, noise in the building, ticket sales going up a little bit here and there, you know, like, or just it being obvious, like a Swerve, like a Carl Fletcher, just absolute goddamn obvious. God, they are in it to win it, right? That's Dynamite. And Collision is a roster full of people that ideally, I know we typically hate when wrestlers are hungry, but are certainly hungry for the spots.
Yes.
And what comes with promotion? Relegation. And if it breaks that wrestler's heart, well, they've seen what's happened to them and they know the way to fix it. That is exactly what Jim Ross curated as a head of talent relations in WWE. I'm not saying it doesn't come with sort of unhealthy setbacks. And
Yes,
I'm not,
yeah.
you know, brushing that aside.
Like
but
an overt developmental.
yeah, an overt developmental, like a sort of an acknowledged, you don't call it an A show and a B show, but everybody knows what they're watching. I've experienced this with Hologram, right? You guys cover Collision, and I will watch.
Half the time.
I would watch it days later, spoiled, emotionless, really.
It's on.
But I best just keep up. I best
It's on
just keep up.
ITV4.
Yeah, and then
Easily found on your uppers.
exactly that, right? Uppers, downers, there it is. And then Hologram, and then the Beast Mortos. And it's like, Jesus Christ. And the Beast Mortos, it has actually happened a bit with the Beast Mortos. Hologram, it didn't, but like...
You got injured.
He got injured. The Arlington tapings felt like it was like Wrestler Island for a minute. And I just sort of thought, it was then, when it hit me, I was like, God, man, like he's really working something here. I think I want to see him make the move up to the big leagues, which... That was a subconscious thing, but I was like, Dynamite is still the big leagues.
Yeah.
Suddenly they're in a storyline there and they feel brand new because it's like, what's this guy doing on Dynamite? And what happens? Sorry, you got to be cruel to insert wrestler. You're doing Saturdays, mate, but like, look what can happen. Your time can come again. There has been, we're not here.
You don't like it, sit out.
Yeah, we're not here to name names and shoot on people.
We're not here to
but
make friends either.
various different complaints.
You need to be ruthless.
Various different complaints from various different people with various different agendas. And I think it's important to use those qualifiers. Have at times said not very nice things about certain people in the AEW locker room and how they perceive the wrestling business. Now, there's a million different reasons for why you might just want to earn your money doing nothing when you're falling on your back for a living. And I don't judge them for that. But competitive environments do generate like a competitive wrestling company, a creatively, like John Moxley, for all of what I perceive to be his faults as a character in the last couple of years, is going out and saying the things he's saying because at his core, he's quite angry with a lot of them sitting there and not having that fire. And he might not be the answer or have the answer, but what he is saying, I think, is chasing that answer. And in Dynamite and Collision, you kind of have the opportunity to take this massive overstuffed roster and make them like work with and against each other again to create that dynamic, you know?
But mainly go back in time.
Yes. Yeah, time machine if we can.
We are almost at our main event, the final point of this list. But before that, it feels an appropriate time to talk about the women's division.
Yes, because don't worry, guys. When the women come out to play, the main event ain't too far away. The women's division often happens right before the main event on Dynamite, with the idea being, God, I'm not doing the whole spiel. You have to subscribe to the What Culture Wrestling podcast to hear it. I've already done it today. I'm not doing it twice. But it feels like...
It's like Tony Khan booking a women's match.
It feels like a little bit of the show where it's, oh, God, we'll get cancelled if we don't do this, so we have to do it. Just put it on before the main event, because otherwise they'll think it's going to be more women on the show later. We can't have that. It just feels like something they have to do rather than they want to do. That feeling has persisted for 5 years. You got to want it. And the thing is, right, I've always tried to be... It's all very delicate and sensitive, this. I think that you would have been like hauled over the coals 3 years ago for saying they're just simply better men's wrestlers than women's wrestlers and more interesting over men's wrestlers than women's division wrestlers on Dynamite. They're very much outnumbered in that regard, and maybe it is sort of a correct ratio of TV time if you're going pure talent, right? But it's not fair. How many men's indies were there at the peak? Yep. ROH, PWG, and then, you know, like, I don't want to name the others, have all been cancelled. But it was pretty booming. It was pretty thriving. And the women for a while had Shimmer. And now it's harder than ever to be a women's wrestler on the rise in the USA, certainly. They've got so much going against them. But now, Willow Nightingale, Toni Storm, Chris Statlander, Athena, who should be on telly, Jamie Hayter, Queen Aminata, Mercedes. There's so much actual great talent. Why can't we have 2 matches on Dynamite?
Yeah.
It's as simple and cut and dried for me. Why can't there be 2 women's matches on Dynamite? There are 2 possibilities here, right? One, Tony Khan doesn't think that much of women's wrestling, doesn't care that much about it, doesn't see the need to put more on, doesn't care about representation, doesn't believe in his roster, happy to just have it as this obligatory exercise. 2, it's a Warner mandate of they don't get the ratings.
Because
because of the stigma, and then it's the cycle.
And the only time they ever do put 2 women's matches on is when they're like moving nights or whatever. And
Yeah,
like,
there's
horrific
exceptions.
look, that. Like,
there's
that's
exceptions, but you can
look, that.
always so easily explained. Of,
We're on Tuesdays anyway, so who cares? It's a really like it's
Tuesday
the opposite
anyway.
effect. Like,
so who cares? Or we can do a squash,
Yeah.
and then a second squash. It's a joke. It's been a joke. You've got the talent now, and you've built the talent to a degree. If you think about it, is this? I'm going to try and paint a picture. Anna Jay is always the example I go back to because I think if she had wrestled solidly on television for 4 years she's been in it now, I think she'd be in a much better spot. Because what happens is every time she gets a program or a little bit of a run, she runs faster each time, as if she's like really chasing that goal, and then the thing she's running into faster and faster just moves away all the time. I feel whenever you see her, you just know, all right, well, I'll see you again in 6 weeks, maybe. You can't invest in a character like that, and she's probably going to lose more often than not. It's a graveyard of potential, this AEW Women's Division. It really is. A graveyard of potential. And Queen Aminata's in it right now.
Yep.
She got introduced, I want to say, early spring.
something like that, yeah.
And I was really taken aback by her power, her speed, how hard-hitting she was. She really felt there's a nasty streak to her work. I was really, really taken aback. And then she disappeared. And she comes back and just not over because she goes from promising to totally squandered. Open and shut. At a minimum, put 2 women's matches on Dynamite.
Yeah, the only sort of cheat code, if you can even call it that, is to be indestructible to bad booking or a lack of creative energy. I would say and wrestlers have that sometimes, but I would say in AEW is probably Willow Nightingale and Toni Storm. I can't think of others that like you can absolutely guarantee will always be there or thereabouts because Chris Statlander is probably the 3. Like a great example in the last month she's had booking wise. It's probably 3 of the entire division. And let's give credit where it's due here. 2024 has been its best year in terms of amassing a roster. Enough so, and I didn't just love this because of the wordplay. The first time I saw the idea of a simultaneous She2 happening with the C2 and the idea of a Dynamite Collision being 6 matches, 3 and 3, or 3 and 2 and 2 and 3 and whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and there's your Tony Khan holiday because you've got 2 divisions that are booking themselves. Yeah. The exposure, the reps, the ring time, the idea that a character sometimes does get over in the body of a match rather than through like just working once and then disappearing again. Like it's not an open goal because it's a risk, but as we've said a few times here, you've probably never been in a better position to take risks. Maybe there is an answer to this question. Maybe it's devastating. Who knows? But like AEW's rating's not amazing. If you cut Dynamite in half and you've got a split of men's, women's, like those quarter hours going to create a so low that there is irrefutable evidence that like you can't do that ever again. I doubt that. I doubt it. People are tuning in to watch a wrestling show, and over a course of a month, let's say, you've got an established star in a Willow Nightingale and someone on the come up again, but Queen Aminata, and both are in the tournament, so you quite like them both. So you've got the guarantee of getting able to see them again the next week against different opponents. That's one of the very basic ways people get over, is that kind of exposure and representation.
I'm glad you made that point, because before we get to the final problem, even though there's probably loads more, I've advocated for a long time, and I think it holds true and gets more true every single week and month, that part of the problem is that with AEW, the men's division, Tony Khan will book a lot of predictable matches because he thinks the matches are the selling point, and maybe they were. Predictable winner versus predictable loser. Star versus either solid veteran, Jay Lethal, talent on the rise, Kyle Fletcher before he started to get over, so now he needs to win, or veteran like Dustin Rhodes, versus your star, like that tier of Hangman, Swerve, MJF, the one that's 50 main eventers long. Because you can only book one way, as most bookers can, that problem is so much more pronounced in the women's division, because you're going to get that Lady Frost, Robin Renegade tier. they just lose all the time every 6 weeks, and then you come back for another 8-minute Lady Frost match on Collision. Meanwhile, if it's Lady Frost's time to be in a wrestling match, you don't get Jamie Hayter, Willow Nightingale, Chris Statler. It just doesn't work when you have that men's division booking pattern to one match per show. It is death to so many promising young careers. Like, it really, really is. I feel like, where would a Lady Frost go? You know what I mean? Like, even in this fantasy booking scenario, you feel bad. They should book it like an all-star division. I would borrow, if I was Tony Khan, what Gedo has done at his peak with the New Japan men's, because that was a pretty small roster, that New Japan roster, and there were more rematches than there were in AEW. Even now, when Tony Khan is a little bit more welcoming of them, I would use a core way more than Tony Khan has ever done across any of his divisions with that women's division, because it solves in part the problem of just having one match. Or I would just book more friggin' women's wrestling matches. It's not that hard.
Final point. Tony can't say no.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest problems, is then it feeds into the first one of, I want to be the hipster promoter that, and it sounds like I'm burying them. I listen to some of their coverage. Voices of Wrestling, their favorite wrestling promotion. Tony Khan wants that type of wrestling media and that type of wrestling fan to favor him. But then, because Chris Jericho's got his ear, there are other wrestlers who will pitch stuff that I know for a fact he probably thinks is rubbish, but he can't say no. He's not wired to do that, right? So I don't know what the solution is. He can't change people in the way they're wired. Tony Khan's 40 years old. I don't know if there's a solution to this, but he has to be able to say no. Like, he's such a greedy bloke. Like, there's certain wrestlers I wouldn't assign, but he can't say no. Like, it's almost if he feels bad. What if, like, Ricochet, and I know how these things work, I think Ricochet probably had an idea that he was going to get a job in AEW before he left WWE. He's like, I'm a full mate, you can't come in. That's how many wrestlers I've got. You can't come. Like, I know how these things work. I'm not naive. But it needs to go with this idea of, if you are a wrestler in WWE who the fans feel like there's still some unfulfilled promise here, even though Ricochet is the one. How old is Ricochet?
What do we think?
I'm 38.
I was thinking 37, 38.
36.
Yeah, you know what wrestler he is. This idea that if you are a WWE wrestler who's had a good run on TV, but there's always a sense that never reached their potential there, come to AEW. That needs to end, and it needs to end pretty sharpish, because otherwise you'll just sign literally everybody, and you'll listen to all their ideas, and then you'll have to give them a big match on pay-per-view. And sorry, I don't know, Beast Mortos. You've been getting over, but you can't be on pay-per-view. That ruins the meritocracy of who actually gets over. Who got more over this year, Beast Mortos or Ricochet? Beast Mortos.
Yeah.
Who was on Full Gear in the main card? Ricochet. I mean, this is what happens when you have to book people who are signed to bigger money deals. And it's just a general, like, there are Chris Jericho segments that Mid-South Wrestling Tony Khan, who grew up in ECW and probably rediscovered his love of the game watching New Japan, who was a huge Ring of Honor guy, he must think are rubbish. Rubbish. We all got taken in by Jericho in 2018. He was amazing. He was amazing in 2019. Now he's just that. He's got that WWE brain. He just does in terms of how he approaches things, and it often collides drastically with the tone of AEW. But Jericho will just do some bollocks with cars, mate. I want to get on with the rest of the show.
Some coins in a car.
Yeah.
He cannot say no to any new signing, to some terrible ideas. And the worst thing is as well, is we know his taste is better. He's talked about it. He's got this encyclopedic brain. If you go deep into his Twitter, he's buried the right stuff. If you go back and deep enough on TweetFinder, so we know this about Tony Khan, and he's actually grown a spine on occasion. If he was so feckless as I sometimes portray him to be, and I do believe that there's a big truth in that, he went to Warner when he was negotiating a TV deal, no less, but the ratings aren't amazing. It was like, no, the right thing to do is to put Mark Briscoe on television. Like, I need you to do this, and they did it. He, in December 2019, told his core group of stars, your creative's not good enough, I'm taking full editorial control, because I don't know if you might not be aware of this. Originally, there was a creative committee into Tony Khan, Cody Rhodes, Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, and Brandy Rose. And they all, very quickly, it was established, had pretty different approaches, and that only got found out once they were in the creative committee, and that's when, like, Tony Khan at one point just literally let people do what they did because that was the way that it operated. Mm-hmm. Now he just seems to do that. When he abandoned that creative committee and did it mostly by himself, AEW ended its hottest period. He listens to the wrong people all of the time, whether they're trying to get their stuff in or whether they're critiquing his product, and he needs to develop a backbone, learn the word no, and trust his instincts, because I think his instincts are excellent.
Mm. Yeah, like, there's enough evidence to suggest, like, bookers have runs, and then sometimes that's that. But Triple H has kind of done it twice. You could argue Vince McMahon certainly is.
He did it twice.
He did it twice. You know, again, like I think like often it's this mix of luck and judgment when it happens the second time around. But like, I think there's reason to have faith in Tony Khan. On kind of like tied into the last one about like saying no to the big roster, the expanding roster, signing talents and things like that. One of the worst things that has happened with the amount of talents he's signed, because he can't say no, is that while AEW, while the box off, while the gate is soft and while like everything's down, it's like, well, you said everybody's a difference maker, and now it appears that nobody's a difference maker. So it's actively having like a negative effect on somebody you're promoting as brand spanking new. If and when, let's be fair, Bobby Lashley doesn't turn the territory around. Love Bobby Lashley, but when the Hurt Syndicate does not turn this like ship around right now, they could be cast as like failures, or like, well, they didn't make a difference. Nobody's made a difference. Okada, Ospreay, and Money with the this year's big three, and like have individually made huge contributions, and at the same time AEW, the graphs keep going downwards. Yeah. So like that's a huge problem with the signing of wrestlers. However, if you do sort of allow a bit of fluidity and you allow wrestlers to leave, you can then bring ones in. Like, we're all talking about Kyle Fletcher now. The more we talk about how great Kyle Fletcher is, what we don't talk about is whose spot he takes. Someone will fall as a result of that, and whether that's into my little fantasy world of over at Collision, but then who falls off the Collision? Like, the acceptance that some people may never wrestle for you again doesn't have to mean it's forever. It just means they see out they see out their deal and they go elsewhere, and then they become the hottest guy in the Indies, or they go to WWE.
Well, that's a problem.
Yeah,
those are problems.
Something happens. That wrestler disappears and you never see them again, or that wrestler reappears one day with a new haircut and a tiny moveset, and you sign them all over again. The best thing about there being two well-moneyed organizations is that there are two significant places for wrestlers to work. I am less inclined to say stop signing people full stop. We have this dance every time a wrestler... I
mean, I'm not saying forever.
No, but like every time a wrestler...
6 months I wouldn't sign a single soul.
But then...
Then it might feel special again.
But then we have the dance. A wrestler is suddenly available and we're like, all right, let them in.
Yes.
Like, you don't. I'll say this, you don't.
Unless it's Cody or Roman magically somehow become available, I would say a flat no to any of them. Shingo Takagi fancies moving to the US. He's one of my favorite Japanese wrestlers ever. I'd say no at this point. There's no need.
My wife stops me buying a T-shirt at a gig unless I'm prepared to get rid of 5, right? Because they're expensive, and my wardrobe is too full of T-shirts that no longer fit. And I'm not saying sack 5 guys, but what I am saying is there is an acknowledgement that they have outlived their usefulness to AEW, except the phasing out of 5 for the bringing in of 1. Pay them every goddamn penny, but accept that this one person is coming in, and that is in line with an acceptance that, well, the 5 that were kind of on the bubble, they're going to see out their wage and they're going to be gone, because like ultimately one of them might be of huge value to WWE, but what's going to happen there? The exact same thing. There's always somebody that has to drop off, and what if they're the person that you want to bring in? I love that idea that people can move, and I want to keep the idea of movement going, but it has to come with the yiddy side of that coin as well.
Yeah. Right, before we say goodbye, because that was the last point. How long have we been doing this podcast for?
An hour and a half.
Right, okay. I think only the true, super faithful, trusted fans have remained. Right? I think you should friggin' punish book someone. Punishment. Wow.
It's like a bonus one.
Wow. Punishment, book a wrestler. Make an example out of someone who deserves it and let it be known. Don't mess with Tony Khan anymore. I genuinely think you should punishment book somebody, you know. I want to see it. It's been a while.
It's been a while.
Been a while. Just someone who probably deserves it for not respecting, you know, him as a match. It'd be funny watching him try and do that. Go and punishment book someone, and then no one can take the piss out of you anymore.
Yep.
Otherwise, that'll happen to them. Follow me on X at @msidgwick. I think I'm half serious here.
Well, that's a big surprise twist at the end
Big
there.
swing.
But there you have it. Follow these solutions and AEW's fixed. Let us know your thoughts in the comments or on X at WhatCulture WWE. Well, actually, you can follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflet at
Michael Hamflet.
You can follow the brilliant author of this amazing article at
Thank you. At @msidgwick.
You can follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at WhatCulture WWE. And make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts. But for now, my thanks to Hamflet Sidgwick. Thank you for joining us. And we will see you soon.